Hello, my name's Philippa Waller.
My name is Penelope Waller, and we are two of the directors at 4D Human Being.
And welcome to the 4D Human Being podcast. What's it all about, Pen?
It's all about your personal and professional relationships. It's about your communication skills, how you lead, how you work and build teams, how you are looking after yourself and your well-being, and how you are much more at choice. What do we mean by that?
Well, sometimes we can get a little caught in patterns in life, and we can all be a little bit on our automatic pilot. So 4D Human Being is all about helping us get back to choice and being a four-dimensional human being. And your fourth dimension, of course,
is intention. So whether it's about your impact, your leadership style, your team dynamics, whether it's about your well-being, whether it's about your communication or your presentation skills, anything that involves human beings interacting with other human beings, 4D Human Being are here to help.
we're going to take a deep dive and look at some tools, insights, theories that are going to help you go from a 3D human doing to a 4D human being, so that you can happen to the world rather than the world simply happening to you. Hello and good afternoon.
Hello. We're pleased, aren't we, this afternoon?
Why?
Well, I'm pleased with my hair and you're pleased with your dress.
And that is what counts.
Shallow, I know.
Very, very shallow. But, you know, we're talking about tough times. And if times are tough, you've got to get the small wins in, haven't you? It's true, though, isn't it? It is true.
It's true.
Piccoli passi in Italian. Small steps. It's true, though, isn't it? Because in big change or difficult times, we can feel so overwhelmed.
Yeah.
But, you know, sometimes when you just...
Oh.
Whatever, yes, sometimes it can be a really small thing like tidying a drawer.
Oh, totally.
That just can give you the gestalt completion.
Totally.
The creative full circle that you've achieved something.
Totally.
When you can't solve the whole thing.
Yeah, or you wake up and your hair just has the right little bit of kickiness in it. You're like, it's a good day.
It's a good day.
Which does go to show how important the small things are in life and how actually we can take a lot of pleasure from the smaller things.
That makes me think of a line in Fleabag when the sisters go to the hairdressers when she's had the haircut, and he goes, "It's just hair," and their eyes just go wide.
It's not.
Hair, it's nothing. It's hair. Hair is everything. Hair is the difference between a good day and a bad day.
So today we are starting a new
campaign. So I
Oh.
think those of you listening and people that you know, I guess I'm curious. It feels like we are, you know, we're through a pandemic. We're supposedly quite a number of years out of that. And, you know, if you read up on history, things like this have happened in the past where we've come out of either depressions, or this is national or global as opposed to personal, or other pandemics or wars or really difficult times. And the expectation is a bit like rationing after the Second World War. The expectation is everything's going to immediately click in and be better because we've had the tough time. We were resilient, we pulled together, we got through it, and now it's going to be easier. And in a way, you can almost get the double dip because your expectation now isn't that it's either going to stay the same or get worse. You've got the sight line of up.
Yeah.
So then, even if you stay neutral, that's a down from there. And then if things get tougher, that's a double. You've automatically got a double dip from the expectation.
And it does feel a little bit like that at the moment. Although, I mean, not all economic indicators point this way, but there is.
Did you just say the word economic indicator?
But there is something in the air. There's something that we're feeling as a nation, and it's not just us. You know, we've talked to a lot of people about this. It's a level of uncertainty and almost holding on to see what happens, or holding on because we're so unsure of what's going to happen. Yeah. So it feels a little bit frozen at the moment is how I would describe it.
I think what's interesting is when you're right in the middle of a more acute change situation like the pandemic, you absolutely know that you're in the eye of the storm. Like there's a certainty about the uncertainty. Whereas when you're in this kind of slower burn, and I say slower, it's all relative, and actually, you know, change is relatively rapid compared to, you know, hundreds of years ago. But from every angle, we've got technology and global populations and markets, and everything is just moving, shifting. And because it's sort of coming from everywhere, we're not it's not acute as in we walk out of our front door and we can't go and see our neighbour acute. But it's just
a sense of what's around the corner.
It's a sense of it's just moving and we don't know where it's going.
Yeah.
And I think that can create quite a lot of uncertainty and
anxiety.
And of course it is impacting businesses and the job markets, and the massive shift and change in how many jobs are available and whether you'll still have your job or whether the market or your whole business needs to change. So,
and as we have spoken about, this is not the topic for today, particularly in terms of managing change more generally, although we are going to talk about one specific area of this. But one thing we have spoken about, Phil, is the fact that every time we are faced with this level of uncertainty, we think it's an anomaly.
Yeah.
We think, well, this is just in the moment. And once we've got through this, we'll be at a whole other plateau of understanding where we're going. And actually, we need to reframe change as a permanent. It's a constant. Yeah. It will never be changing in different ways and to different levels. But it is a constant in our lives, which why even more so we need to really focus on what we're going to talk about today, because you cannot assume that change will just stop. It won't.
Exactly. And actually come back to, okay, how do we respond, not just to change, but to life?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. And I see it on an individual level, I'm sure you do as well, in coaching and therapy, that we've got this sort of underlying map or belief system that if we just get through this difficult time, we'll get back to the stability and security that is our right as a human being, or is the life is.
Then I can breathe.
Yeah, and we've definitely talked about this before, and of course that just isn't what the human condition is. So it is sort of reframing it, and actually, of course, we've talked about this before, whether you're thinking about it from a kind of change perspective or a kind of psychological or, neurological, or whether you think about it, we talk about the improviser mindset. You can come at it from so many different angles.
Yeah.
But to be comfortable with the shifting, moving, ever evolving, changing, new things coming in, how do we integrate and use it and adapt? And, one of the things we'll talk about today is that mindset. So we very much felt this out there in the ether. The feeling of, things haven't got back to the solid plateau that we dream of.
What's happening, what's around the corner.
Yeah, and we only have to say the word AI, and how we also hear through clients what is coming down the pipe. I mean, what is absolutely hurtling down the pipeline there, and the impacts that's going to have on all of us. So we want to talk about what to do in tough times and change in a really, really practical level that you can kind of grab hold of personally. Because you and I have often talked about whether it's a personal sudden change or loss, or whether it's a community, or whether it's an organisation. You've got different choices about how to respond to it. You can just get mad and fight it. You can blame the world, or you can actually go, okay, what's in my control?
Yeah.
What can I do?
And often our patterns get dialed up during times of uncertainty, change, anxiety. And some of those patterns might not be very helpful. And also some of those patterns in terms of how we respond, how we think, how we feel, how we behave, what we say, they can come from a place of fear around the uncertainty. And when that uncertainty gets greater, that gets even more dialed up. And sometimes, often, when we come from a place of fear, our fight or flight system has kicked in, or our freeze system. Yeah. And it's not always the most useful response to life.
I've got a 24-hour allowance or offer, which I think you can have 24 to 48, depending on, obviously this isn't if you've lost somebody or something, personal has happened. But when you get some news in, you can give yourself a window. So,
allow the system to sort of emotionally respond.
Yeah, because you want that emotion to be felt and released. You definitely do. So allow yourself to sort of vent, go through the wall of fire, whatever you need to do. Have a good shout, moan, scream, panic. And we would always then say at 40 Human Being, you want to very quickly get to, and now what?
And get the intentional self.
And get the intentional self fired up, because you don't want to be stuck in that panic.
Yeah. So throughout this campaign, we're going to talk about 5 particular areas that we're going to focus on in terms of what we at 40 Human Being believe will be useful in times of particular change and uncertainty. We'll talk about one of them in depth today, and then we'll cover the other topics in later podcasts.
So 5 steps to really deal with change in your life. And like we said, that could be organisational change around you. You might be staying in an organisation but seeing people leaving, or massive change happening in terms of the structure. Or you might have heard that you will be leaving the organisation. So it might be that you're facing either having to find a new job or being out of work for a while or whatever it might be. So you might be leaving, you might be staying, but either way, you're facing big change. So it impacts everybody.
Yeah.
And there are 5 steps that you can take on either side of that fence. And this also connects very well to personal change as well.
Yeah.
Number 1, increase communication. So don't even keep it at the same level, increase it. In times of difficulty, in times of change, if that void opens up and there's no communication in it, it will, I promise you, get filled with fear and anxiety. And you can see it.
Assumptions and gossip.
And assumptions and gossip. And that is a lot of energy going into a space that really, as a leadership team, you need to be filling with communication. Even if you don't have the answers, you don't have any news, even if you don't agree with what's happening, you need to be communicating and aligned in that communication.
And I think that is my absolute favourite one. Yeah. And we'll talk about this much more today, about why it's so important and why actually it often doesn't happen.
Yeah,
we'll talk about that.
Exactly. Okay, number 2 is the accept and build mindset. So this is what we were referring to earlier. You want to get yourself and get your leaders into the accept and build mindset. This is the mindset of
this is actually happening.
This is what's happening.
Or we don't know.
Yeah, or we don't know. Exactly.
That's the reality.
That's the reality.
I have to accept that.
And what can I do from here? And that
is... Rather than, no, I don't want that.
Yeah, exactly. La, this mustn't happen, or it shouldn't be happening, or or I can't do anything with it. Yeah. And this is also, of course, and I speak from personal experience, as do you, Pen, with things in your personal life. There was a phrase for me when I lost somebody very near to me, and it just is.
Yeah.
That this is what it is, that we to really ground in this is what's happening.
Yeah.
And then you can start to ask, now what? So the accept and build mindset, absolutely game changing. And if you haven't seen my TEDx talk online, go and have a look. It's 13, 14 minutes and it's absolutely about this mindset in the most tough times. Okay, number 3. The energy to act. Now, this is, of course, for you if you've had the difficult news, if you're being transitioned out of a company. But equally, if you are still at a company, you've seen colleagues leaving, or you're watching a lot of layoffs. Leaders, get your people together. Yeah. You want to get that energy reconnected, get them united and energized and remotivated, because whichever side of the change or tough times you land, it can be very, very de-energizing.
And we underestimate the impact of that kind of freeze mentality that can kick in, which is a very strong defense mechanism in terms of, surviving or, unknown, fear, danger, whatever it might be. But if we freeze and don't act, we're increasing the void.
That
and I can't wait trying to live with.
I can't wait to talk more about that when we come to this topic in more depth, about the action is your friend at a time where your whole nervous system and potential panic reaction is either thinking wait, or it's clouding your prefrontal cortex into confusion. So acting is really useful when thinking, too much thinking is not going to be your friend. One of the really important things to say on energy to act is the second bit, which is to act, to do something rather than ruminate. Okay, number 4, connection. Whether you are looking for a new opportunity, you want to be building that network. That's the main thing you want to be doing every day. That's your job
or looking for some support for your well-being.
Or
supporting other people in terms of their well-being. Connection. And we talk about this so much.
Yeah. It's so easy, isn't it, to become isolated in that.
Well, also to think, I've done a really good job. I've delivered everything I need to do. I've worked really hard. I'm really competent. That's all great. Yeah. And when times get tough, it's your connections that you're going to rely on for so many reasons in terms of business and opportunities and support.
Yeah. And also on that, again, if you're staying at a company, leaders, get your people together, get them energized, get them connected. You really want them connected. And also a big, big reminder, again, whether you're facing personal difficulty and change or organisational, it can be so easy for us to feel like we're the only ones dealing with what we're dealing with. And actually, if there's one thing that connects and unites us, it's that we're all in this together.
Yeah.
Everyone goes through something like this. Yes, human experience.
Yeah.
And number 5 is story of the future.
Oh, we love this at 40 Human Being. And we'll talk much more about this on the 3rd episode in this campaign. This is the first one we're doing today. And we very often say that we think of story as re-narrating, crafting a story of the past, which is very useful in terms of storytelling skills. And as human beings, we are very good at believing and stepping into a narrative. So what the story of the future is, it's about crafting a narrative and a vision that feels possible, it feels tangible, it feels believable, that people can really get hold of and step into and feel like they know the navigation, the path ahead, even though it's actually uncertain. They feel like they've got something to hold on to and somebody to follow. It's so important to have a strong narrative.
Yeah. So we need a story to step into. Whether you're staying in a company and there's been a lot of people leaving, or whether you are moving towards a new future, you want to be telling a story, a compelling story of the future that either you or the people remaining in your organisation can step into.
Yeah.
If it just looks like a void ahead, then our system again is much more likely to go into freeze because we don't know what the terrain looks like. But again, the brain doesn't know the difference between reality and what you tell it. And if you give it a kind of, it's almost like painting a scene, isn't it?
Totally.
As an actor to then step onto that stage.
Exactly. That it's truthful.
Yeah.
It's well thought through. Yeah. The other thing we might touch on in that episode as well is your exit and entry narrative, in terms of if you are transitioning and moving on to a different role or moving out of a company, your exit and your entry narrative, they are in your hands to craft and choose, and they will be the next bricks on the path to whatever lies ahead. So we might talk about that as well.
Do you know what? Something you just reminded me of is we've talked about before, the Chinese character that means both crisis and opportunity. And I heard on something I was listening to the other day that the word for blessing comes from an original Anglo-Saxon word for blood, and it was and it connects the idea of a wound and a blessing, and it had a similar feel to that crisis opportunity, that in every wound there is a blessing.
There's a learning.
There's a learning, or there's something that can come.
Future,
something that can come from that can learn from that can heal from that. So and that narrative piece really speaks to that it can be difficult to see it at the time.
Yeah.
But we were just talking over lunch today. There's a wonderful writer called Sebastian Junger. If you haven't read any of his books, check them out. He wrote a book called Tribe, which I read years ago, and he's just written a book about, I think it's called something, it's not escaping death, but it's something like that. He's talking about really being in tough situations, putting himself in the front line as a journalist in war zones, to have more meaning, and that a life of comfort often doesn't create a lot of meaning. And what's interesting about that, just to reflect on, is of course we don't look back on the sitting on our patio drinking a cup of tea or a glass of water as the most meaningful moment in our life. It might be really nice, but we'll tend to look back on the tough turning points as the most meaningful. And while it's not always comfortable being in them, they create meaning and identity for us.
And it's important how we story them.
And how we story them, exactly. Okay,
so today we're going to start with number 1, which is possibly my favourite one. Yeah. No coincidence that it's at the heart of what 40 Human Being do, which is, in times of change, uncertainty, anxiety, thinking about both personal lives, but also we talk a lot about corporations and teams, increase communication. Communication. And for anybody who's been through a big organisational change, I can guess that probably most of you who are listening have not had the communication that you would have liked during that change. And there are some good reasons for that, and we're going to talk about how we can avoid those pitfalls. Yeah.
I want to give my example here, because for me it's a really useful touchstone, that if you think about a kind of a crisis headline, like some terrible disasters happened, or you could just think about a plane being cancelled or delayed at the airport, right? So anywhere on the scale of something has suddenly happened that has either inconvenienced or really caused a lot of distress to
or you're caught in a traffic jam.
You're caught in a traffic, exactly. You're caught in a traffic jam.
Don't know what's going on.
And when communication drops out, that is when you start to see crowds and people getting very distressed, angry. You start to see, if you were at an airport, you'd start to see the sort of crowd, the mob start shouting at the service desk. When we're not communicated to, it starts to get very, very frightening and panicky. Now, that's not the same as, oh, yes, we've got you all 5-star hotels and we've solved the problem. Yeah. But somebody stepping forward and filling that space with, we're really sorry, this is what's going on. These are the steps we're now trying to take. Yes. If we can ask you to blah, 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 there's some water over there.
We'll keep you updated as much as we can.
In 15 minutes, I'm going to give you another update. You've dealt with it.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah. So we see it all the time.
Yes. And there are very good reasons why, in those situations in particular,
you want to run away and eat a donut.
You want to run away and eat a donut, and you don't want to be the person who's standing in front of the mob saying, "Oh, the plane's delayed." Yeah. And similarly, in organisations, if communication already isn't brilliant in your organisation, then certainly through tough times, it's going to get tougher. If you do have good communication in your organisation, it may well get even more brilliant during change, but it might go the other way, because when we either genuinely don't know what's going on in an organisation, or we do know what's going on, but we don't agree with the choices that have been made, or we do know what's been going on and it's not particularly brilliant news for our team members. Those are 3 very good reasons why we will tend to avoid communication rather than step into communication, because we either don't know what we're going to say, we don't agree with it, or we don't want to upset people.
And we don't want to be in the firing line.
So there's every chance through change that we will pull back a little bit from communicating, which may feel like the right thing to do because you don't have all the answers, you don't know. But of course, in terms of how then people feel and how they will respond, it's the absolute worst thing to do.
Yeah, which makes me think of a wonderful story from a coaching client a number of years ago who worked in a big multinational. And he was tasked, as I'm sure many listeners can empathise with and relate to, he was tasked with letting go a large group of people in the same room, making an announcement about there being multiple layoffs. And one of the people in the room had been, I think, his best man at his wedding. So this was not an easy task. And we worked through that communication and he delivered it. And at the end, the colleague friend who for whom he'd been the best man and a number of others came up and said to him, "I'm so glad it was you who was giving us this message. Thank you."
Yeah.
And that, as we've talked about, he couldn't change the what.
No.
But he could absolutely influence the how and leave an impact on all of those people that was not George Clooney in the film Up in the Air, which is, just brutal.
Yeah.
So, somebody being shipped in just to give that message coldly.
Or making the choice not to step in and not to communicate.
Or not even to communicate. Or sending, you hear those sort of horror stories, don't you, about people finding out they've been fired by text or exactly. Yeah. But standing up, hand on heart, very human, acknowledging how difficult this is and really, really proper communication, human communication, in it, as we would talk about, in every dimension, physically, emotionally, intellectually, and intentionally.
Yes.
And that is what makes the difference.
Totally.
There was a stat, just to finish that, a transformation is nearly 6 times more likely to be successful at organisations where CEOs communicate a compelling change story.
Yes, yeah. And we'll talk a bit about the how of that communication and also the fear that we have in terms of the response from other people. But before we do that, going back to the reasons why people don't step into this, and that example from your client was just absolutely brilliant in terms of stepping in and the how. The reason that we don't, as we said, is because you don't have enough information, you don't agree with the message. So what we need to get back to is moving slightly away from the what I'm going to communicate. Either I don't know it or I don't necessarily agree with it. We need to move into, how do you want your team members to feel?
Yeah.
Like, if you don't have enough information to give them, what can you say to them in terms of, you're working hard to get information, you really care about them, come and ask any questions. If you don't agree with the message, but you have to deliver it anyway, how can you support them and how can you leave them feeling in a way that they feel empowered to either ask questions or move forward? So it's the intentionality that sits behind the message rather than the what itself. Because the what is often out of your control. Not always, but often.
Yeah, absolutely. With exactly that, and that comes back to that phrase we use all the time. Is the world happening to you, or are you happening to the world? And there are things that you cannot change about the curveballs that come in, but you can change how you respond. And I would even add to that it's absolutely about how you communicate in terms of the intention you set. And the second how is how you then are with what comes back at you. So yes, you can plan your communication, you can plan how you stand, your tone, the words that you use, you can plan how heartfelt that is and connected, and how you want to make people feel. You can't control necessarily what comes back to you, which for me is the second very human element of difficult communication. That as a leader, as a human being, the more that you can self-regulate and the more that you can learn to sit with, Jesse Pavelka said, didn't he, on the podcast that we re-released last week, how you can just sit in the moments that rock your world. How can you sit with your own discomfort and with other people's feelings that they absolutely have a right to? So something about really learning and taking time to develop the skill and to treat as a skill the ability to hold a space, not to control what happens in it, but to be able to hold it so that people are allowed to feel what they feel. And that, when you can do that, when you can allow for people's feelings, you're in a much, much safer place because you're now not trying to control. Everyone's got to just sort of smile at me and say, okay, well, we'll tally on here and we'll do the right thing and we'll make it as easy as possible. Actually, no, people are going to have feelings, and you just hold it. You haven't got to fix it. You haven't got to solve it. No. We talked earlier about it's 50% of the relationship is yours, but you've got to allow people their 50%. Totally.
So one of the reasons I believe that we are fearful of stepping into those challenging communications and challenging times is it's more to do with our fear of how we will respond to what comes back at us. So I think we can tell ourselves, I'm not going to do it because I don't have the information, or I'm not going to do it because people might get upset. There's a partial truth to that. I would take it one step further, and I would ask yourself how you feel in terms of your control, your empowerment, your skill set, in terms of how you will respond to what comes back at you, which you can't predict. And I think very often it's that fear that stops us, is I don't know if how I will respond. Do I have the skill set to respond? Which is why in leadership and communication in leadership, we do so much work on the self and turning the mirror back on yourself. Because as you said, once you understand yourself, once you understand that, and feel empowered, skilled up, self-aware to step in and respond to what comes at you, you've pretty much done the work that you need to do, because you are 100% responsible for yourself. And as you said, you are only 50% responsible for the relationship you have with the person sitting in front of you. So you deal with yourself, skill up yourself, and you've done most of the work.
And those are the stats. You are 100% responsible for your own reaction and response, but you're only 50% responsible for the relationship.
And part of that is the skill in which you deliver the message. Yeah. And then part of that is how you then respond to it.
How you sit
But you are not 100% responsible for that person's emotional response. As long as you've delivered your message in a skillful way, you are not 100% responsible for their response.
Yeah. And this goes back to one of our favourite models, which of course is the ego grid, which is your ego being that you've developed your ego to be in a healthy enough place that if somebody comes back with anger or upset, that actually you can hold that space with curiosity or empathy without feeling the need to defend or justify
or feeling fully responsible to solve their feeling or to make those emotions go away for them.
And one of the challenges with that, and this is why training and development is so important. It's why we do what we do. It's not just why we're passionate about helping other people and leaders, why we do it for ourselves, because it's a game changer in terms of life, is that we are rewarded so much as we grow up for solving problems. For having the answers. And then you hit a certain level of leadership, and we've seen it again and again, where if you haven't developed the capability to simply sit with and hold the unknown, and evolving,
and be with
what is in front of you and evolving, you can't knowing that you cannot fix it all, you're going to hit a ceiling. You're going to get stuck, because at some point you've got to be comfortable with, I don't have the answers for this, and I really, really hear you.
Yeah. Otherwise, you either won't communicate, or what can often happen is we do communicate, and then the other person starts getting upset, and we'll keep talking to try and solve the problem, or slightly backtrack on, no, but it's all right, you'll be all right, I'll find something.
That's right. And then you're into all kinds of, and actually it's got such a thread to attachment theory in psychotherapy that some people are very securely attached, and that's wonderful. Often we'll have different patterns of attachment, one of which is avoidant, which is fingers in ears, run away, just wait. It's not happening. I just need to keep myself okay. It's too dangerous over there, so I'm not going to have the conversation.
And lots of people have this.
Lots of people. It's a strategy.
Very common, very normal.
That we develop exactly as if I just detach, it's going to be much, much safer. And in a way, it can be. It's not going to be your friend in the long run, because you're avoiding the situation. You're not in relationship. And the other attachment that we can have...
The other sort of extreme.
The other extreme, we're going right to the extremes here, is what we call a preoccupied attachment in adulthood. And that's when we have to make the other person okay. So this is people pleasers. We've learned as a young person that if we can keep our caregiver happy, we'll be compliant, we'll do anything that you want to keep that person stable, to keep the equilibrium in relationships. You'll notice that if you have that pattern of, it's almost like sort of more like a puppy of I'll do anything to make it okay for you, or you'll run away. And those are the extremes. And those are really...
And there's a whole scale in between.
And there's a whole scale in between, of course, and right in the middle is
those
secure attachment.
Patterns will come through.
They will really
come through in times of change.
So really, really worth noticing. And because then you know where your development is. You know whether or not you need to step in to reassure and connect, or whether you pause and give some space and only take 50% responsibility. So it's really useful to know where you go.
And it's not about swinging the pendulum in the opposite direction. It's about finding a kind of a nice balanced middle ground where you communicate well and often, but you don't feel responsible for solving the other person's either emotional state or situation that they're in.
I think that's just a wonderful way. A wonderful phrase, wonderful way to think is, you have a right to your feelings and other people have a right to theirs. And as long as you're not being abused, like, you also have a right to protect yourself. But actually we must allow, and I think so much communication doesn't happen because we don't want to be dealing with our own or other people's feelings, exactly as you said. You know what it reminds me of? I've definitely used this example before, but I just love it so much. It's the Inside Out movie. Oh yeah. And I know I've referred to it before, but when the childhood friend in the little girl's mind is sitting on the cliff edge looking at all the
I think it's the toy dump, isn't it?
It's the toy dump, and it knows it's an elephant, isn't it? It knows it's destined to go in there because the child's growing up. And the emotion of joy is doing the preoccupied attachment of trying to make it all okay, and it's just not working. And then finally, sad comes and just sits next down to the elephant, just goes, it's really
hard, isn't it?
It's hard. It's really tough, isn't it? And then the elephant goes, I don't know why, but I feel better. And for me, that is, I mean, I said it before, but it's such a beautiful demonstration of, it's not just a better idea to be able to sit with someone's feelings and emotions and not try to tap dance them out of it. Yeah. It will make them feel better.
Totally.
They'll feel heard. Remember, the other side of communication is listening.
Yeah, totally.
It's feeling heard. So when we say increased communication, it's not just about talking. No. It's about holding and containing and listening and allowing people to have that space, isn't it?
And we talk a lot about energy, and we'll talk much more about energy on the second episode in this campaign, in terms of really having that energy to act and, energizing your people to act. Energy is also important when you're communicating. Now, we do often talk, if we're talking about presentation skills, public speaking, being on a big stage, obviously depending on the context and your message, we will often talk about perhaps increasing your energy. And when we talk about increasing communication through tough times, we don't necessarily mean
tap dancing.
You're tap dancing and jumping on a stage.
It's going to be fine.
It's sort of energy level 8, 9 or 10.
Yeah.
These might be the times when we need to increase the communication, but we need to keep that energy nice and balanced in terms of how we're holding other people in the space we're giving them. More is not necessarily higher energy. 100%.
And also, if you think about, having difficult news and you have a choice between, look, it's going to be, I just think we're going to pull together. It's going to be fine. We'll all be fine. Versus, I really, really believe that together we can find a way through this.
Yeah.
And we can find strategies and places that where everybody will be able to play to their strengths, and I know that we'll come through it and we'll all be like, just the tone just feels more solid and more secure. One more thing that this made me think of, that lovely piece, that's the doggy there communicating.
He's in the sun.
I thought a wonderful piece of research that connecting the choices around the medium through which we communicate and our brain chemistry, because we know, we've said many times, we live in an era of email and text.
Yes, and pings. And
alerts and all of this. And
which is really useful.
Which is super useful. And there's a time and a place. And as the dog is trying to verbally communicate with us, demonstrating our point. And there was a lovely piece of research. It was actually done on teenagers with their mothers.
Yeah, teenage girls with their mums.
The difference between your stress levels, your cortisol levels, so your stress hormones, and your oxytocin levels, which are your happy bonding, safety hormones. The difference between those levels when you're texting
with your mum
and when you pick up the phone. And so it's the beginning of
it's extraordinary.
of a kind of wider piece of research that I think would be really useful to be done. When you speak to the person who can sort of hold the space and support you,
the sound of their voice,
being on the phone with them, being actually in verbal communication. Remember, this isn't even in person. You're not even in the same room. You're
actually, and I don't think it was even video calls. I think it was just
phone calls. So it's just the voice. Your cortisol levels go down, your stress levels go down, you have an increased sense of well-being and support, and your oxytocin levels go up. And your oxytocin levels are incredible for shifting you into the healthiest part of your nervous system. Your socially connected ventral vagal, where life feels much more safe, it feels more possible, you feel engaged, you feel socially connected. And that's the hormone that then is being released. Now, this is simply by making the choice of whether you pick up the phone
or text. And I can imagine when they started this piece of research, I don't know, because obviously one is not necessarily supposed to go into a piece of research with a hypothesis, but I can imagine one would think, possibly when you speak to your mum, when you hear her voice, your oxytocin might go up, your stress levels might go down.
What are your stress levels like when your puppy's making
It's the same. It's exactly the same. But I can imagine one would think that the texting with your mum would not make much difference. But what actually happened in reality in the research was that the opposite happened from when you hear your mum's voice. It wasn't just neutral. When they were texting with their mum, these teenage girls, their cortisol levels went up and their oxytocin levels went down. So the stress goes up and that kind of happiness hormone goes down. Literally the opposite of hearing somebody's voice. That is how much written communication can cause the opposite effect to perhaps what you're trying to achieve. So obviously, as you say, Phil, we don't think this research has yet been carried out in more of a professional setting, but nevertheless, it's absolutely incredible.
It's incredible. It is just incredible. And if you think about, imagine it's like being dumped over text, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you have written words, should we let you out, Bubs?
You sound like you've got a bit of a stress hormone going on there. Let me let you out of the door. That's a bit of sunshine.
If you receive, when we talk about increased communication, now that's not to say you never want to release a piece of copy or an email or, a message on your...
And texting is useful for organising.
Exactly. It's very useful for certain things. Exactly right. Yeah. Exactly right. There'll be a meeting at, 5 p.m. Make sure everyone's... Great. But actually understanding that by picking up the phone, you are having a completely different impact
on someone's nervous system and their hormones.
Exactly. So when we say increased communication, that isn't just about make sure that there's a weekly email newsletter. It really is the courage to pick up the phone or have that video call, or even I would offer putting out a short video,
probably better than an email.
Probably better than an email, because if you think about a time where you're in a bit of an irritation on a project, and somebody sends you another email with a couple of reasons why this is a problem or why they can't do it. It's just annoying, and you're now more annoyed because you've basically got information on a piece of paper or
that you
on
then
email.
Have to deal with.
Yeah, and that you don't really want that to be the answer, and now you're left with having to fill in 100% of the emotional field on that.
Yeah.
Whereas it's such a rule for me now. If I feel like there's been one or two exchanges on email and we're not getting somewhere, or it's starting to feel a bit annoying, just stop emailing,
Yeah.
pick up the phone, because then you've got all of those other communication, all of those non-verbal signals. You're doing half of it each.
Yeah.
You're not filling in those gaps from a place of irritation.
And also, whilst we can do a lot in terms of our email and written communication, in terms of the intentionality that sits underneath it, I definitely advise reread your email before it goes.
And be explicit. So I read my intention.
Yes,
here
I
is.
really want you to feel X. But
Yeah.
we're not always brilliant at that.
Yeah.
The tone of our voice and the way that we will actually speak when we're in front of people is often very different than we will speak, in inverted commas, in an email. So already just the medium will probably change how that message lands, and of course set the intention in terms of how you want your audience to feel, and then how you deliver the message as well.
Yeah. So I wonder if we kind of wrap this up
Yeah.
with some tools and tips. I wonder if we talk about, first of all, the medium. So pick up the phone. So really know whether or not, number one, when you're increasing communication, have you overcompensated on email, newsletters, texts, sort of communication going out from your comms department that hasn't even come from you personally, that doesn't have a quote from you even. Like, just take a note of, if communication is increased, great, but where is it? What is the medium? What are the opportunities for you to pick up the phone? Who are your key influences in your team? If you can't pick up the phone to, all 20 in your team, who would be the key people who would be the ones to ripple that message out once they've spoken to you? Like, be really strategic about it. Pick up the phone. If you can get into a space with people, do
Even
that.
better, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Energy, exactly as you said, Pem. Really flex your energy. So you might start with a softer energy and a welcoming, and I know this is really tough times, but you might just dial it up towards the end as you kind of leave people feeling like there's possibility.
Come and
there's
talk to
energy.
me.
Come and talk to
Yeah.
me. I'm really here. So really think about your energy levels. Don't just garble and fill the space with panicky high energy and think that's communication.
The most important thing is how you leave people feeling.
How you leave people feel, which brings us to number 3, which is intention. Put that word in your head. Set the intention. Remember, your emotional self is probably coming from a place of not knowing, uncertainty or fear.
Yeah.
So if you don't put a word in your head, it's going to be one of those 3
Yeah.
that hit your audience. So put the word in your head. You might not be able to access positivity or motivation, but you might be able to access warmth, support, or openness.
Exactly.
So really set an intention. Language, and I know you love this one, Pen, so I'm
Yeah.
going to hand this to you. I, you, we, and it.
Yes.
So one of the biggest things in communication, if I just start this bit, is if you create an us and them or a you and them, it's sort of over before you've started, because as soon as you create those 2 silos, you've just created a tennis match for people to bat their fears back and forth.
And I think a brilliant example of this is that if anyone has watched the series The Office, either in the States or in the UK, or you might have your own version. I mean, he has to make some people redundant, and he literally says, really bad news, you've all been made redundant, but really good news, I've got a promotion.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's not where you want to go. So the we space is really, really useful in situations like this. And I would also think about the type of emotional language that you use as well. And if you set an intention, if you put a word in your head in terms of how you want people to feel, it will change how you speak, how you behave, how you make people feel, but it will also change your language. So very often we can open these kind of messages because we know it's challenging, or we're worried, or we're frightened about the uncertainty. We can open with things like, I know everyone's feeling really worried and this is really challenging and it's tough for everybody. And whilst that's true, you have just coded everybody's brain with anxiety, worry and fear and uncertainty. So you can be choiceful. We're all here together, and I know how much we care about each other as a team. And, we're going to work through this together and help you. That's a different opener in terms of where you put people's brain chemistry. So really, really thinking about the language that you're using and the pronouns, the I, the you, the we and the it.
Really nice, that priming in a way.
Yeah.
You've always got choice.
Yes.
And it's taking that time, isn't it? As we would say at 4D, it's really being intentional, taking that time. We come back to this again and again and again. Who is driving the bus of your communication?
Totally.
And if your emotions are the only part of you driving it, then you are at the mercy of whatever either you're feeling or your audience is feeling. Set your intention. And the last bit is just to reiterate what we said earlier. Remember that scene from the movie Inside Out. You can plan your communication. You can have the courage to step up, pick up the phone. And even if it's just to say, I just wanted to touch base, I just wanted to be in communication with you, I want you to know that I'm here, even if there's no update. You can absolutely do that. And while you cannot control what comes back to you, you can make the choice to simply hold that space and let it be. And if someone says, well, what are you going to do? Or why aren't we? Or we should, I'm really hearing how much, frustration is here.
And once you can do that, it's likely that you'll feel much more relaxed and much more confident to step into communication more often, which goes right back to the beginning of this conversation, which is the thing that tends to fall away is any kind of communication. So once you feel skilled up and confident about how you're going to communicate, how much you're responsible for and how you're going to respond to others, it's much more likely you're going to step in and fill that void, which is what you need through change.
Yeah.
The change is much more likely to be successful if there has been good communication.
And your people will never, ever forget the way that you made them feel, particularly if it's their last day or it's a day of massive change for them. Yeah. They will thank you for making it. Giving you, making the impact that you make. It just makes me think there's one more tip on that, which is both and, which is such a lovely tool to use. Both and means absolutely acknowledging what is present in the field. I really hear how frustrating or uncertain this is, and we are going to do this together, and I'm right here. And so it's both and. It doesn't have to be one or the other. We don't have to make it all roses, but neither does it have to be all doom and gloom. It's both and. And that's a really nice way to just hold a space, isn't it?
So through times that feel uncertain, what we would say at 40 Human Being, because we love it, is communicate, communicate, communicate.
And then communicate a bit more.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the 40 Human Being podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Do take on board some of the insights, tools and tips, because every time that you try something new to get back to choice, you are making a vote for the you that you want to become. And I love that phrase, Pen.
I do too. And please do share this episode with somebody that you know would really benefit from the lessons and learnings we've been chatting about today.
And of course, if you're interested in more from 40 Human Being, do get in touch. We run workshops, trainings, online, in person, conference events and keynotes. We've got the 4D on-demand platform for your whole organisation. And we do have a free Essentials membership where anybody can sign up for absolutely free to access some of our insights, tools and tips. So do get in touch with us if you'd like to hear more. We cannot wait to hear from you and to carry on the conversation.